So I've been at Big Ten Media Days all week. Now, when I come to this stuff, I don't look forward to the press conferences because I don't think we get a whole lot out of that. When we go on the road in the spring and I sit down with these head coaches, that's when we get the really good stuff. So I don't come to these for that. I don't come to hear the players give us scoop on the record that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten. When I come to this stuff, I'm trying to find out as much as I can. I'm trying to get as many people who know these teams to raise the hood and to let me look under it. And some of it's off the record, but honestly, even the off the record stuff, it can greatly benefit the way we talk about these teams on the record. So with USC, with Lincoln Riley, I think that there's a lot to like about the team, but there's also huge red flags about the team. So Lincoln Riley came in here yesterday, as you and I are talking on Thursday, and he said something that if you've been watching the show for a little while should not have surprised you. He said, we're still playing catch up. Some of you thought that was excuse making. Okay, you're free to think that. He's not lying to you when he says we're still playing catch up. And he's not just talking about from a coaching standpoint. This stuff's hard enough to coach. They are still playing catch up. Defensively, he brought Alex Grinch over there. It was a failure. And he had to admit that 2 years in, hit the dump button, go across town, get Deonton Lynn as his new defensive coordinator. So that stuff they're playing catch up in. That's in his control, though. The stuff outside of his control, he kind of talked about that. He alluded to it. We're playing catch up. Just because you go to USC doesn't mean you get all the trappings and the glamour of Southern California baked into your football program. And what I mean by that more directly is they are behind on NIL, okay? So that's what he's talking about. That's the 50,000-foot stuff. What I was talking about with a bunch of folks around USC when it comes to that team about is Miller Moss, they got very little doubt about. I got very little doubt about Miller Moss. I think the receiver room probably even maybe a little underrated with some of the young guys in there. I think the defensive line questions are absolutely real. I didn't talk to anyone that alleviated that concern for me. And so, look, you could tell the demeanor of Lincoln Riley. He kind of rolled in here and acted like I'd act. He acted like someone who was kind of over talking about all this stuff. It kind of is what it is. You just want to go play ball. But having those concerns and having those limitations, if you really do have that on the defensive line, it puts such a ceiling on your program that's below Big Ten championship level. Now, here's the follow-up to that. If you look at their schedule right now, they play LSU week 1. LSU's got some of those same questions. They play at Michigan week 3. Michigan, if you're going to have to go to the big house, this is the year that you want to, right? There's never an easy time to play Michigan, but certainly you'd rather play them this year than last year. A little bit later down the road, at Minnesota, at Maryland, at Washington, a total rebuild. So there's this world where the glass is more half full on USC, and maybe, just maybe, they catch some teams that were expected to be a little more up and they're down. So this is not an indictment as if to say there's no way they can compete. It's just I think they have to have some things outside their control go right for them to compete. Oregon, there's something to pay attention to here. So Bo Nix out, Dylan Gabriel in. It may very well be that we get to the end of the year and we look at the skill set of Dylan Gabriel. And I'm talking about in the games against Ohio State, big-time games. Games where the opposing team matches them roster-wise. There aren't many of them. It may be that we get to the end of the year and we look and we say, Bo Nix was actually a better quarterback than Gabriel. Because I don't think Dylan Gabriel has elite, like top-tier physical attributes. He's a very cerebral player. He's a very sharp player. He's plenty good enough. Don't get me wrong, plenty good enough to do what they want him to do. He's not a guy that's about to go in there and wow you from a raw physical standpoint. They got a really good offensive staff at Oregon. But what I'm trying to say is if anyone's out there trying to fool themselves into thinking Oregon's upgrading at quarterback from Bo Nix, they are not doing that. So then the follow-up question is, well, okay, Bo Nix at quarterback and the rest of the supporting cast, that was not good enough to get Oregon where they wanted to go. So why should I be sold that now he being Dylan Gabriel, will be good enough to get them where they want to go? And, hey, that's a fair question, which is why I haven't talked a lot about quarterback. If I loosely trade that, if I just view it as a wash, I'm looking at line of scrimmage play. And for a couple of years now, you've heard me very intentionally talk about versatility with Oregon because what Lanning did was he was at Alabama and he was at Georgia and he watched what those guys did. So Nick Saban and Kirby Smart both recruit the same way. What they do is you go get the best of the best, but what you do is you stack talent in the defensive front to where you can be very, very multiple and very versatile because you don't play the same team every week. Just like Oregon on their schedule here, you go like Michigan State, but then you play Ohio State the next week. Defensively, I may want to present very, very different things to one versus the other. If you have the depth and the versatility in depth, which is what a lot of people around the program keep preaching, then you can do both. I think they have that. That's not a guarantee of anything, but it is a guarantee that from a man-to-man standpoint, there probably is one team, maybe two in this conference, that match up personnel-wise with them defensively. Ryan Day and Ohio State are one of them. So Ryan Day has a really unique challenge on his hand. When we had him on the show a couple of nights ago, I asked him to talk about pressure. And I did that for a reason, because a lot of folks talk about pressure around Ryan Day. A lot of people would say, well, if he can't get it done, Michigan game doesn't go their way, they don't win it all, whatever you fill in the blank with, then maybe he's on the hot seat. Now, I think that's ludicrous, but who cares? I don't make the decisions up there. But my point there was, there's this pressure. If you guys were around the program, you'd kind of feel it. You'd stop thinking about the outside pressure, because there's so much pressure inside the program competitively that guys like him and folks like the folks at Ohio State put on themselves, that it's almost an afterthought, kind of the outside noise. Now, that doesn't quiet down the outside noise, but it does mean that I don't think it makes them as uncomfortable as some may believe it makes them. The thing they have to do is they have to be a little bit better in some areas, and they have the ability to do whatever they want. So we had Ryan Day on the show, and I asked him, hey, when you get to the end of a season, you got beat by Michigan again, and they took it to you physically again. You can recruit any kind of player you want. You can go portal in any kind of player you want. You have the kind of depth and talent on your own roster to be whoever you want to be. Is there a feeling that we're Ohio State, we're going to stick with who we are and do what we do? Or do you look around and say, no, we actually want to tweak this and change that? Notice what he said. He didn't get into specifics, but Ryan Day said, yeah, we identified some stuff. Yeah, we know we got to change some stuff. That is code for we should be the ones taking the sledgehammer to people. We should never get to the end of an Ohio State football game and have folks talking about how we got it taken to us physically, how we were the second most physical team on the field. He didn't say that, but he's insinuating that, and he's right about that. That's the whole attitude around the program. And for all these transfer portal moves, pay attention to the guys that were already on the team that return. That's the key for Ohio State and fulfilling their immense potential this year. Jonathan Smith, I think, is going to win at Michigan State. So I said that on Twitter. I got accused of not being specific enough. I think Michigan State, not this year, but in the coming years, will be the team that every year when we come to this event will be circled as a dark horse. The people who know the conference will call them a dark horse. I think Jonathan Smith walked in and his head was swimming initially at Michigan State, coming from Oregon State, about how recruiting may work in that part of the country, the whole NIL structure and what the going rate is in the NIL market. You're having to learn from scratch. There's nothing that equips you for that. I don't care where you've coached. I don't care how good you've been. That stuff, it's not like it's eased up just because he's a few months into the job now. That stuff takes some time. I am telling you, I'm very confident in saying this. From a raw football standpoint, Jonathan Smith knows what he's doing. And so everything that Michigan State should be their identity, it kind of overlaps with what his identity is. That was what they were at Oregon State, by the way. So I don't have any doubt there. Like, their over-under win total is 4.5 this year. I have no clue where I'd go on that. I think they'll be a pretty bad team this year. I think in the coming years they'll be a winner. They will be a consistent contender there. And Jedd Fisch, man, I think you just saw him walk behind the camera here. Washington's about to head out the door. Total reset. There was some thought that, well, if you go to a national championship game and then you get a new guy in, maybe there's some carryover. There's no carryover. You got an entirely new roster. He was sitting behind me a little while ago. I heard someone ask, what's the biggest challenge? He said, building a roster. Like, we're starting from the ground up pretty much. You kind of are, but you kind of aren't. Because there's one very important thing to remember when you're taking over a job. Most guys take over a job because the guy before them wasn't good enough and he got fired, which means you have probably some cultural rot and you really have to rebuild everything. Jedd Fisch has taken over for a guy who was so good, Alabama wanted him and came and got him. So there may not be a bunch of returning starters around, but there's a great program that he's inheriting. So you don't really have to rebuild it. It's not like a dump truck. You don't have to rebuild the dump truck. It's just the stuff that was in the back got dumped out, and so you have to refill that. But there's a refill versus a rebuild. Jedd Fisch doesn't have to rebuild anything. He just has to refill. There's a lot of folks in this conference who would tell you the collection of coaching right now is as good as it's ever been. And they're going past the surface. They're going to Fickle at Wisconsin. They're going to Jedd Fisch. They're going to Matt Rule at Nebraska. You've got a guy like P.J. Fleck, who all of a sudden is one of the most tenured coaches in this conference. It's a really deep lineup. It's a steady lineup. And finally some depth to it of overall coaching talent. And by the way, Greg Schiano at Rutgers. Just Greg Schiano at Rutgers. So that's some of the stuff we were hearing from Big Ten Media Days this week.